Do you ever feel like you're just running on a treadmill? Like you're constantly chasing metrics, maximizing your output, looking for that next big achievement, only to reach the end of the week and feel completely, utterly exhausted.
Right.
You know, you check your screen time, you look at your calendar, and you realize you have been sprinting for days. But somehow,
You haven't moved an inch.
exactly, you feel like you haven't moved an inch. And if you are nodding your head right now, or maybe letting out a deep sigh on your commute, you are definitely not alone.
No, not at all. It's an incredibly pervasive feeling right now.
Yeah.
Just that creeping sense of running on empty
Yeah.
while desperately trying to build something meaningful, whether that's a career, a business, or just a community.
Right. And that is exactly what we are getting into today. Welcome to the deep dive. Today we are exploring a really fascinating stack of source material from a document titled When Success is Rewritten and the Mission Becomes Ours.
It's a great piece.
It really is. Our mission for this deep dive is to extract the most critical insights from this text to help you understand why modern work culture, and honestly even modern faith culture, can feel so incredibly draining. And more importantly, how we can fundamentally change that dynamic.
Yeah, that's the key.
And just to be clear up front, we have a lot of different sources today, and while the core document is deeply rooted in Christian theology and biblical history, we're simply here to unpack the ideas presented. We're looking at how they apply to the universal human experience of work, identity, and burnout.
Right, because the central aha moment of this material, the big idea that really anchors this entire discussion, is the argument that our society has the fundamental order of operations totally backward.
Totally
Where
backward.
the premise is that we have become completely obsessed with focusing on activity before identity.
Right.
We prioritize what we're doing over who we are becoming. And the result of that flipped equation, it creates a very specific kind of exhaustion. The text calls it burnout disguised as devotion.
Burnout disguised as devotion. Man, that's such a striking phrase.
It hits hard.
It does, because
Yeah.
it feels noble, right? You think you are just being dedicated. Whether you're a programmer writing code until 2 a.m., an entrepreneur trying to bootstrap a startup, a designer managing endless revisions, or really just someone trying to navigate our hyper-connected digital age, this deep dive is going to fundamentally challenge how you define success.
It has to be a paradigm shift. Because when you define success purely by your output, by the code shipped, the product sold, the engagement metrics, you are setting yourself up for an inevitable crash.
Yeah.
The foundation just isn't there to support the weight of the activity.
Okay, let's unpack this, because the material highlights a core tension right from the beginning. It talks about the difference between a mission or a calling, feeling like this incredibly heavy weight that you have to drag around, versus a mission acting as a natural overflow of who you are.
Yeah, that's a crucial distinction.
The argument is that when you forget your underlying identity, whatever you are trying to accomplish just becomes a massive, crushing burden.
Right. And to illustrate this, the source traces a very specific pattern from ancient biblical text, looking at the narrative arc from Genesis all the way to Revelation. The consistent pattern identified is that God forms a people before assigning them a purpose.
Form before purpose.
Exactly. Identity is always established before activity is demanded.
But wait, let me push back on that for a second. Because in the modern professional world, that is the exact opposite of how it works.
Oh, entirely.
You have to prove yourself to get the job, right? You do the work, you put in the grueling hours, you hit the KPIs, and then you get the title. You earn your identity through your activity.
That is exactly the modern default. And it's precisely why the author argues we are so exhausted. The text uses a primary example from the book of Exodus to show a different way.
Okay.
So the people of Israel are rescued from Egypt long before they are ever given the law or the Ten Commandments. Deliverance happens, the relationship is established, and then comes the responsibility.
Ugh.
The text emphasizes that God says, "I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt," placing that reality first before a single command for obedience is given. Deliverance precedes demand.
So the identity is locked in before the work even begins.
Precisely.
And this applies beyond just ancient history, right? Because the source brings us into the New Testament framework as well.
Yes, it looks at a letter called the First Epistle of Peter, specifically chapter 2. It points out that the early church is described first by who they are. They are called a chosen race, a royal priesthood, a holy nation.
All identity markers.
Exactly, all identity markers. And it is only after establishing those markers that it mentions what they're supposed to do, which is to proclaim excellencies. The pattern is clear. Name the people, form the people, and then send the people.
Right.
If you reverse it, prioritizing the sending without the forming, you just get exhaustion without transformation.
And we see the danger of getting that wrong literally everywhere today. When we replace what this ancient wisdom calls abiding with achievement, we completely fracture our foundations.
We do.
The modern world often measures faithfulness purely by output. We look at attendance, we look at digital reach, we look at revenue growth. But there is that famous metaphor in the Gospel of John, chapter 15, about the vine and the branches.
Oh, that's a great example.
It bluntly states that apart from the vine, the branches can do nothing. You cannot manufacture the fruit.
What's fascinating here is how the text contrasts our modern obsession with metrics against the early church. If you look at the historical accounts in the book of Acts, those early believers did not have a marketing strategy.
No SEO optimization back then?
Right. They didn't have digital infrastructure, a branding campaign, or an optimization funnel. Their growth was entirely organic and embodied. It was relational, not engineered.
Hold on, though. If I am launching a startup today or trying to build an audience, I need a marketing strategy.
Sure.
I can't just sit in a room and hope people magically stumble across my product. How does this source reconcile the need for a brand with this idea of organic growth?
That is a crucial distinction. It's not saying marketing is inherently evil. The argument is that when our core identity erodes, we compensate with image management.
Oh, wow.
We confuse branding with witness. A polished image might get someone's attention for 3 seconds on a social media feed, but the world doesn't actually need more polished images. It craves authenticity. If your brand is just a hollow shell masking a burnt-out creator, it is not sustainable.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Because the source material doesn't just leave us hanging with the problem of burnout and image management. It provides these 3 ancient metaphors to help reframe our worth and recover the sense of identity before activity. Can you walk us through those? Let's start with the first one, the bride.
The metaphor of the bride comes from an ancient letter to the Ephesians. The core concept here is that being the bride means being loved before useful.
Loved before useful. Think about that in the context of our hyper-productive world. A bride does not earn love by performing tasks or hitting quotas. She receives love and responds with devotion. When we remember this framework and apply it to our lives, obedience and work become an act of joyful fidelity.
Not a transaction.
Exactly. It stops being this anxious striving to somehow prove our worth to the world, to our boss, or to the algorithm.
That totally neutralizes performance anxiety. If you are already loved before you are useful, you don't have to panic every time a project fails.
Right.
And then the second metaphor explored is the body, drawing from the first epistle to the Corinthians. I love this analogy because it is so incredibly relatable to anyone working in a team today. The text points out that the hand does not envy the eye. The hand serves because it naturally belongs to the body.
If you really internalize that framework, it completely destroys the modern compulsion for comparison and competition. You aren't trying to outperform the eye, you are just being the best hand you can be.
It replaces toxic competition with coordinated collaboration. You realize your specific role is vital, and you don't need to be everything to everyone.
Which is a massive relief. And the third metaphor is the temple. Now, usually when we hear temple, we think of a giant stone building you visit once a week.
But the text makes a really profound point here. A temple is a dwelling place, not an event venue. So if your identity is rooted in being a dwelling place for the divine, your sacred space isn't just a physical building you commute to. Your sacred space expands wherever you go.
So a Zoom call can be a sacred space. A coding sprint can be a sacred space.
Precisely. Mission isn't event-driven anymore. It becomes inevitable because that presence goes with you into your office, your living room, and your digital spaces. It makes the ordinary completely extraordinary.
Okay, conceptually I love this, but does this actually work in practice? Does shifting from activity to identity really create tangible change? Or is this just feel-good philosophy?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, history provides some compelling proof. Historically, spiritual and cultural awakenings always reshape identity before they reshape geography or societal structures. The author points to a group in the 18th century known as the Moravians, led by a man named Zinzendorf.
Wait, for those of us who aren't huge history buffs, who exactly were the Moravians?
Think of them almost like an early startup, but instead of tech, their focus was spiritual community. They weren't a massive empire or a wealthy institution. They were essentially a tiny, tight-knit community in Europe devoted entirely to prayer and shared identity. But because their foundation of identity was so incredibly deep, they sparked a movement that reached across the globe to the Caribbean, Africa, and the Americas.
So it wasn't a strategic 5-year expansion plan drawn up on a whiteboard.
Not at all.
Eh.
The source also mentions the historical awakenings influenced by John Wesley around the same time. The massive social transformations that came out of those movements, hospitals, schools, social reforms, were the result of spiritual renewal, not the starting point. The overarching historical pattern is that you deepen a people before you deploy them. Deep roots create wide branches.
That is such a powerful pivot point, and it bridges us perfectly into how this ancient wisdom applies directly to our modern metric-obsessed digital culture. Because the source explicitly addresses the digital age and what it calls the trap of analytics.
Oh, the trap of analytics.
For creators, for entrepreneurs, for anyone putting work out into the world, numbers have become the ultimate scoreboard. We all know that incredibly relatable anxiety of posting a project, refreshing the page, seeing the engagement numbers stall, and suddenly feeling like a complete failure.
It is a highly volatile way to live. We start using these numbers as a literal mirror for our own self-worth. Every dip in engagement feels like a personal indictment, and every surge tempts us with massive ego and pride.
The dopamine hit is real, but so is the dread.
To counter this, the source brings in the wisdom of a well-known ancient text, the Gospel of Mark, which asks what it profits a person to gain the whole world, or in modern terms, to gain massive, measurable digital success, but lose their soul in the process.
Ouch.
It is a harsh metric check. The argument is for redefining our metrics entirely. Success isn't just transactional, it is deeply formative. The ultimate question isn't just what product you are building, but who you are becoming in the process of building it.
So what does this all mean? If we aren't supposed to just blindly chase the analytics dashboard, what is the actual currency we should be dealing in? If I am running a business, I still need a currency to operate.
The alternative currency proposed is trust. The text argues that trust is the sacred capital of sustainable growth.
Sacred capital, that is a great way to frame it.
It fundamentally changes the objective. The source references an ancient proverb, Proverbs 22.1, which states that a good name is to be chosen rather than great riches. In this line of thinking, reputation isn't just clever branding or PR. It is character displayed consistently over a long period of time.
But let's be real for a second. Short-term manipulation absolutely works. Clickbait gets clicks. Outrage generates engagement. Aggressive sales funnels convert. Why shouldn't someone use those tools if they get results?
Because it is a short-term game that destroys long-term viability. The material notes that while short-term manipulation might yield temporary digital traction, you get the spike in the graph, it actively erodes credibility. True integrity is not just a nice moral virtue. It is actually a strategic advantage.
Nice.
If your success is going to be sustainable, it has to outlive platforms and algorithms. It has to be built on trust.
That makes a lot of sense. Algorithms shift constantly. One update, and your entire SEO strategy is dead. Platforms rise and fall.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
The text points to an ancient warning about building with materials that can endure fire. Not everything we construct in the digital space will last. The critical question you have to ask yourself is whether your product, your content, or your code genuinely serves people, or if it merely exploits their attention. Does it honor human dignity, or does it just mine them for data?
And that leads right into how we actually apply this, because it's one thing to talk about these high-level metaphors of temples and sacred capital, but the source is very clear that this has to descend into our lived daily reality. How do we actually make this shift? The document provides a framework to move from what it calls leverage to legacy.
That contrast is vital to understand before we get to the steps. Leverage asks, how can this benefit me in the short term? How can I maximize my return right now?
Okay.
Legacy asks, what will remain when I am gone? Who am I impacting? True legacy is relational long before it is exponential.
Give me an example of that.
The text uses the historical example of Jesus investing deeply in 12 individuals for years before ever reaching the thousands. The most scalable, enduring impact usually begins incredibly small, local, and relational. Deep, not just wide.
Okay, let's get incredibly practical. The source outlines 5 specific, actionable steps to help make this shift from leverage to legacy, from activity to identity. I don't want to just rapid fire through these. Let's really look at them so you can walk away with concrete things to do today. Step 1 is clarify your missional identity. What does that actually look like?
It means getting it out of your head and onto paper. The suggestion is to write down a simple 1-paragraph statement answering 2 questions. Where are you currently placed in life right now? And how can your life bear witness or provide value right there? Not where you want to be in 5 years, but right now. And then you have to revisit that statement regularly to stay anchored when the metrics start making you anxious.
It's about owning your current reality. I love that. Step 2 is establish sustainable spiritual rhythms. Now, for a digital worker glued to a screen 12 hours a day, what does a sustainable rhythm mean?
It means simple, repeatable practices that disconnect you from the treadmill. It is not about adding a massive, burdensome new routine to your already packed schedule. It might be 10 minutes of silent reflection before opening your email or a walk without your phone. It is about practices that actively remind your heart of your broader identity, rather than just surrendering to the daily grind of output.
Disconnecting to reconnect.
Yes.
Step 3 is to practice everyday testimony. I'll be honest, the word testimony sounds a bit intimidating, like you need a stage and a microphone.
It's the exact opposite of that. The text advises sharing your story, your struggles, your growth, your authentic self naturally and humbly with just one person in your existing circle of relationships. It is about vulnerability over the water cooler or on a casual coffee chat, not a broadcast to thousands.
Step 4 is to pursue unity intentionally. I imagine this is about escaping our echo chambers.
Precisely. The challenge is to identify one person, or perhaps an organization, entirely outside of your immediate comfortable circle and find a way to collaborate or partner with them. It is an intentional move to break out of professional isolation and that toxic competition we talked about earlier.
And finally, step 5, measure what truly matters. This is the big pivot away from the analytics trap.
Right, instead of just opening your dashboard to look at attendance, clicks, open rates, or revenue, the text urges you to figure out how to track stories of actual transformation. Are your clients actually better off? Is your team healthier? Measure faithfulness and integrity, not just raw volume.
You know, stepping back and looking at all of this, the true goal of the source material really isn't to get you to do more. In fact, if anything, it seems actively opposed to simply piling more tasks onto your plate. The real goal is to help you become truer, to move from seeing your daily work and your mission as this heavy, isolated effort to experiencing it as a unified, natural overflow of who you already are.
Well said.
The task before us in this hyper-connected, burned-out world is undeniably great. But the source reminds us of an ancient promise that the grace available to us is greater. This is from 2 Corinthians 12:9. Ultimately, we are building systems in our lives that reflect the actual state of our souls.
And this raises an important question, which is perhaps the most provocative thought the text leaves us with.
Okay.
The document notes that every single system you create, your daily workflows, your hiring decisions, the way you manage client data, how you respond to a failed project, every system carries a theology. It reveals what you ultimately believe about people, about power, and about purpose.
That's heavy.
It is. So consider this. If a complete stranger were to perform a deep, objective audit of the everyday systems you have set up in your own life right now, if they look closely at your calendar, if they analyzed your budget, if they tracked your digital screen time, what would they conclude is your actual identity? And based purely on those everyday systems, how are you truly defining success?
Man, that is a question that will definitely stick with you long after you take your headphones off. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We hope this exploration helps you redefine your own metrics so that you can leave behind not just impressive numbers and analytics, but real trust, genuine legacy, and transform lives. Until next time.